Hi, everyone. This is Doug. This is part two of our episode series review of the grounds for core beliefs. That is the core beliefs of our Yahshua Words Only fellowship. This is our online church that we participate in. It's just a few of us, but that's okay. We call this our Shabbat order of worship. And what we begin with is an orientation of what are the grounds for our differentiating ourselves from others. And so this is part two. If you've missed part one, I'll put it link to it in the description to this episode. So here we begin. This is a pickup from in the middle of our orientation discussions. Okay, so let's turn to next Mark 8, verse 15. Would anyone like to read this passage?
Yes, please.
Mimi, go ahead.
And he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, i.e. the false teaching that can leaven the whole loaf. Mark 8:15. And then from Acts 23, it says,
verse 6.
Verse 6, but when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I'm a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, of the hope and resurrection of the dead. I'm called in question. I rest my case.
That was a direct lie right there, because that's not why he was being brought there.
It's about that, Marty, because I was going to want to bring that up. So let's just compartmentalize. Mimi's pointing out is Paul is admitting to be the very thing in the present tense that Jesus said, beware the leaven or the teaching of the Pharisees. So now, Marty, what did you want to say about him lying perhaps here? Is that possible?
Oh, when you go back to the reason that they were taking him to bring him here, the problem is these events don't go follow chapter for chapter. The events jump around. And so when you have to almost do a study of the event when the people from Asia came who were against Paul because they thought he brought Trophimus into the temple. That is the reason he's being brought before these people now. But that happened in a different chapter, see. Our chapter and breaks, people see. A lot of people read 2 chapters here and 3 chapters there, and that's not always how the story goes.
Right. So it's in Acts 21 that the Jews of Asia come to the authorities and ask them to arrest Paul because he's introduced or somehow led Trophimus to defile the temple. And then Paul's excuse when he's confronted by the authorities is, oh, well, I was in a ceremonial bath when that all happened, so I'm not responsible for Trophimus. But Trophimus was his friend from Ephesus, and Trophimus' violation including crossing what's called the middle wall of separation that was put into the temple to prevent the Gentiles from passing through. There's a big sign and a thing on the side claiming if you pass this thing and you're uncircumcised, you're a Gentile, you'll be subject to a death penalty. And so Trophimus went through that, and the Jews of Asia went nuts. They said Paul should be held responsible for this Ephesian defiling the temple. I'm trying to explain here that I think he was, what Marty's trying to say is it's in a different chapter than this Acts 23, and so it seems disjointed, but it was in Acts 21 through 22 where this account is where Paul is being charged by people in the Jews of Asia. That means Asia Minor. That's the western part of Turkey today. It's across from the Mediterranean from Israel, and they accused him of bringing in, is their words, bringing in Gentiles who defiled the temple, and then it identified Trophimus. So Luke is telling us and setting it up. And Luke is not hiding from us, incidentally. When he introduces this verse, he tells you Paul is making this up to create he's taking advantage of the fact he knows these people are divided over the issue of eternal life. So instead of telling them the truth, when they said, what are you charged with? Because they don't know what's going on. They're the Sanhedrin and, the people the Jews of Asia are not present. He's now given a chance to say what it is he's charged with. And instead of telling the truth that I'm charged with this fellow Trophimus defiling the temple and I'm supposed to supervise him and keep him from going past the middle wall of separation, Paul, doesn't tell the truth. He says, I'm here. What does he say here? I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, and the resurrection of the dead is why I'm called in question. And that had nothing to do with it. But Luke even tells you in introducing this verse, he says Paul sensed one part were Pharisees and one part were not, and he knew the issue was over. They had a disagreement on whether there's eternal life. The Sadducees, a weird belief system, is they believe when you die, you die. But the Sadducees were not real Jews, just so you know it. I know this sounds crazy, but they were appointed by the Herodian family, which are not really Jewish people. They're Edomites. And so they're not real high priests. They're all serving Rome, the government of Rome, and the Herodians they're subject to Rome authority. And so that's why they don't really believe in eternal life. But the Pharisees at least had that right. There is such a thing as eternal life. So, of course, hold on, I have to admit someone else here. Okay. So
See, the thing, I've heard pastors from the pulpit say, see how wise Paul was? He played the race card and he used their own beliefs against them. And I've heard that several times from the pulpit.
Yeah, you know what? The problem with that is the Sanhedrin is a court of law that there's nobody who's going to be asked to appear as a witness who isn't already been put under oath. It's impossible. So the procedure is all under oath. It's like if I go into a court of law, the judge and I don't have a discussion off the record. You know what I mean? The witnesses don't have discussions off the record with the judge. The judge has a role, and these are 12. I think it's a panel of multiple judges. I think there's the Sanhedrin might have been 20 people. Whatever. They're sitting in full meeting to see what happened here. There's a big Hazariah that went on at the temple. The Jews of Asia are very upset. So this is what's going on, and he lies to them. The interesting under oath, and Jesus said when he was asked in Matthew 19 how to have eternal life, one of the things he said you have to do is you cannot bear false testimony. And the Ten Commandments, it actually isn't about lying. It's about giving false testimony in court. Is a way of not being qualified for eternal life. Interestingly enough, that's how serious an oath in court is. Not an oath outside. You shouldn't take oaths, to be believed. I'm telling the truth, Paul says 6 times. That's totally what Jesus condemned. You're not supposed to, use this adjurat. It's called an adjurat. I'm telling the truth is what you say in a court of law. It's called the adjurat portion, meaning I swear. I am telling the truth is what Jesus condemned in using to be used in regular conversation outside of a courtroom. So the odd thing is he uses it all the time to try to make himself sound truthful. But when he had the chance to be telling the truth when he was already put under an adjurat by the court itself, he tells a lie. He says, I'm here because I believe in eternal life. Oh, that was so ridiculous. And even Luke lets you know that's kind of a part of the whole point. But there's a reason why Luke lets you know all these things. And as I said, the book of Acts is not written for Christians, and we'll handle that in another time and place. But it's definitely just written as an appeal brief to win an appeal, because the church itself, the 12 and James, all realized that if Paul loses, we could be outlawed. So they had to defend him. They had to get their good, faithful Luke, who was very well liked by the 12, by the apostles. He was the guy given the mission. He could speak Latin. Clearly, his name, Luke, is actually Latin. So he was born in a Latin world. He could write in Latin, but he also could write in Greek. He was very, very well educated. And so they were lucky to have him. And he translated the book of Matthew in Hebrew to Greek. And that's why it's a pretty good translation. There's maybe a couple of things he shouldn't have said are not correct, but that's neither here nor there. I think he mistranslated that Jesus said you're to hate your parents, when it says really you shouldn't love your parents more than God. So that's different. So anyway, but Luke is generally misunderstood as being pro-Paul. No, he's pro the church, and he's going to defend Paul to the hilt, even when Paul says crazy things and does things even unethically here. And that's something that we got to realize. An attorney has a duty to advocate. And I think Luke, he's called a doctor. I don't think he was a medical doctor. I think he was a doctor of laws, juris doctor in Latin culture. That's where that comes from. My belief. But I have a whole article I'm working on that, and we'll get to that another time. Okay, so and then we'll talk about the Matthew 24 another time. We'll do another opening maybe next week, and we'll do a similar type session. So I'm going to turn the recorder off again. All right, that'll conclude this part 2, and we'll pick up with further parts in episodes in the future based on our next week's orientation. So the orientation changes from week to week, and we keep adding and subtracting and basically reminding ourselves of core principles and things that we want to bring up if we're in a conversation with someone about Paul. I thought this would help those of you who are sympathetic to that point of view, that we believe that Jesus is supposed to be the sole pastor, the sole rabbi, and right now in the church, the overwhelming position of the church when you go to church on Sunday is no, no, no. Paul is our sole rabbi. Paul is our sole teacher. When Jesus said, Matthew 23, he said, I'm your sole rabbi. He says also in John, I'm your sole pastor. All right. Well, anyway, God bless. I hope this helped. Ciao. Bye.